the Florida Gators and stake their claim for the national championship of 1996.
Here's Tebow, jump pass, throw it to the end zone, and a touchdown! David Nelson scores!
Back down. You can stand me up at the gates of...
Dropping back to throw, pumps and fires the ball over the middle. It's Doering! It's Doering! Got a touchdown! Doering got a touchdown! Oh, man!
I'll be turned around. And
On a body within 10 yards, lofting down the sideline for Johnson, and he is level.
won't back down.
All right, this week on Gator Glory, we talked to one of my favorite Gators. Listen, as we talk about Gator Glory, what we're talking about is a slumbering program waking up and realizing its potential. And for me, as that birth began, in the early 90s, there are three Gators that stick out to me more than any other. And one was Shane Matthews, who we talked to, who's fifth string and then suddenly is the SEC's all-time leading passer. There's Willie Jackson, right, who came primarily as a walk-on, just following as a legacy and ended up being an NFL player. And there's our guest this week, Chris Doering, who joins us right now. And Chris, you, to me, also symbolize Florida burgeoning into a national power. You went there as a walk-on. You chose to do that as a lifelong Gator fan. And I guess my first question would be, is there any way you could have known that your career at Florida would have become what it was when you elected to go there?
It's so funny looking back now. I think in life we're maybe kept from knowing certain things that will prevent us from achieving stuff that we're supposed to. Like the odds of somebody walking on and earning a scholarship is probably pretty long, but the opportunity to walk on and then catch more touchdowns than anybody in the history of the SEC for 25 years and to be able to go on and play in the NFL, all those things that I did, like, they don't happen typically, but I didn't know any better. And, fortunately I came from a family that supported me and believed in me and told me that they would be right there with me, whatever I decided to do. I was a lifelong Gator fan, having grown up in Gainesville and having two parents that graduated from the University of Florida and attending every Florida sporting event from the time I was probably 4 or 5 years old. So it was in my blood. And I just, I'm so grateful for having the perfect circumstance to, one, walk on, and then to play for a coach in Coach Spurrier, who didn't care if you were a walk-on, didn't care if you were a highly recruited guy, just wanted you to play the way that you were coached. And so fortunate to have been taught all of the nuances of the passing game and specifically the receiver position from guys like him and my receiver coach, Dwayne Dixon.
Did you have an aha moment? You go there as a walk-on, you're probably fanboy when you get there for your first semester, but did you have a moment, whether it was in practice or when you got some early game time, where you said, not just, I can play at this level, but man, I can play at this level?
Well, you mentioned Shane Matthews. I mean, that was one of the things. He's the SEC Player of the Year in 1990. Here I am in 91. I'm catching passes from him in practice. We're warming up out on Florida Field together, and I'm like, wow, this is kind of surreal. But I think one of the things that stood out to me and to Coach Spurrier, one of the things that gained his attention, when our first conditioning test, when I arrived on campus there, we did the 12-minute run, which for skill position players was 7 laps around the track. So 1.75 miles, you had to finish that in under 12 minutes. Well, I ripped that thing up. I was a great distance runner. I was extremely competitive and won that thing by a large margin. And I think that stood out to Coach Spurrier because he always talked about, John Wooden and some of the things that are important to coaches or guys that are in great condition and guys that love to compete. And I think I displayed that right off the bat with the way that I handled the conditioning test. But I think as far as, I just had been taught, how to run routes. I'd been taught how to catch the football well. And I came in 1991, there were 3 receivers that had been signed, Jack Jackson, Sorolla Palmer, and Ed West. So I was the fourth in that group. I was the only walk-on in that group. And I just, from the get-go, was able to do the same similar things, was able to make plays. You know, I think the guys realized how good my hands were, and I got immediate respect from everybody else in the team. And I think one of the other things that I got to do that's not done as much today was I got a chance to redshirt. You know, I was 175 pounds probably. In fact, my sophomore year in 1993, when I'm playing against Kentucky, making that catch up in Lexington, I'm probably the same height I am now, 6'4", but weighing 180 pounds. So physically, you know, probably not prepared to play in the SEC, but that didn't necessarily stop me. So I look at everything kind of playing out exactly how it was supposed to, having me in the right place with the right people at the right time, and just the dominoes falling into place. I just couldn't have been more fortunate to have had the upbringing that prepared me for those opportunities, and really the drive and perseverance and belief in myself to just keep fighting on, where I think a lot of other people probably would have given up or gone another path.
Was getting the scholarship a surprise? Was it something planned that you knew was coming all along? But tell me the moment when you realized you were now a scholarship athlete at your dream school growing up.
Yeah, I always looked at being a walk-on kind of as a scarlet letter, like I wasn't as good as everybody else, you know. And I remember, I think in the 92 season, they were doing a profile in the Gainesville Sun of every position. And when they got to the receivers, you know, they have a little blurb about each receiver, and the blurb next to my name was walk-on Chris Doering, you know. And so I took that on as like part of my name. And I always wanted to prove that I belonged and get a scholarship to take that walk-on title away. I almost looked at it as a negative. And I think in hindsight, it was actually a positive, because how many times do we see guys that are given scholarships out of high school that think they've arrived at that point in time when you've really done nothing up to that point? So I remember, you know, that 91 year, walked on, got redshirted, did the scout team stuff. 92, I made the travel squad, caught my first pass up in Knoxville when we got blown out by Tennessee in 1992. And then right before the season in 93, I had a great spring. Things were going really well. Had myself in the mix to start playing a lot. And one of the morning practices during two-a-days, when we got done, coach called everybody up, and he was doing all of his post-practice announcement, and announced to the team that they were putting me on scholarship. And I just remember the excitement of all my teammates for me. It was almost like they were more excited because they knew how hard I had worked and how much it meant to me. And so I'm really, in hindsight, blessed that I didn't get a scholarship out of high school. I'm glad I didn't get an offer from some other school, because I probably would have gone there and taken it. But walking on, proving that I belonged, earning that scholarship has not only, you know, given me a perspective on what that meant in college, but it's kind of been the story of my whole life. You know, being a second team All-American at Florida, catching more touchdowns than anybody else in SEC history, and then being projected to go in the third or fourth round of the NFL draft, only to go and not be drafted until the sixth, and then getting cut over a 10-year period of time, 9 different times, moving from city to city 22 different times from the time I left Florida to the time I retired from the NFL. Nothing's ever been easy for me, but I think what I went through and what I continued to go through, the perseverance that it built up in me, and the belief in myself that it created, has served me very well in my athletic career and also in my post-playing days. You know, I got into the mortgage business in April of 2007. Couldn't have been any worse time to enter into that market. Yeah, so that perseverance has served me well. We're almost about to celebrate our 15-year anniversary there. Looking at, you know, the SEC network, I was working for ESPN doing college football games, SEC games on the broadcast that were being produced by ESPN and shown on CSS, and I just assumed I was going to be folded into the mix with the SEC network that first year. I wasn't given that opportunity. I always thought I was going to be calling games forever, and then I get this audition for the studio gig, and I get it in the second year of the SEC network, and I've been there for 7 years now on a gig that I absolutely love. So I think just a great reminder of what we think our path is in our head is not always the case, and that there's always a better plan that you just have to kind of trust is going to play itself out.
Any sense of remiss that they win it in 96, the year after you leave? I know you're exhilarated as a Gator, but was there a part of you that had at least a little bit of jealousy with that locker room and that post-game field would have been? Yeah. I mean, these are my teammates. These are some of my best friends that are doing it. I'm not a part of it. You know, I felt for guys like
like Jason Odom and Reggie Green, guys that came in with that recruiting class with Danny Warfel and James Bates and all those guys. Reggie and Jason didn't get redshirted. They played as freshmen in '92, so theoretically they probably could have and should have been on that '96 team to win it all. But it was I feel like our '95 team is forgotten about quite a bit, and that's all right. I think there were some extraordinary circumstances that allowed the '96 team to lose to Florida State in the last game of the season and get in. Extraordinary circumstances to see the '06 team lose to Auburn and get in. '08 losing to an unranked Mississippi team at home and get in. I mean, those things are subjective from year to year. But I really believe our '95 team was probably better than a couple of those national championship teams for sure.
All right, let's finish with your most famous play. Maybe the most famous play in Gator history. It certainly would be top 5, at least in my mind. It's a where were you moment for me. And, I was around the program a lot then, and I've always kind of drawn – it's interesting to me that play, I think, in part has the livelihood that it does because of Mick Hubert's call. And – that was kind of a coming out for him, too. Mick had not had that job, but maybe a year. I mean, he was a relative unknown to Gator Nation. Here you are, really, that's your coming out moment. And I think that those you guys kind of combined to make that moment, and I think it enhanced both of you as far as recognition.
Yeah, for those that haven't seen the recent SEC Story documentary on the SEC Network, they did a great job of documenting those voices of college football in the SEC and the play-by-play guys of the radio networks of each of those schools and what they've meant to the fan bases. And you're right. I grew up listening to Otis Boggs. I grew up listening to David Steele. Mick Hubert was a very new voice of the Gators there when I got to Florida. And so, ironically, not every game was on television the way they are now.
Hey, man, I was in a sports bar because it was like some pay-per-view deal. Yeah, and in fact, I was on a date with who ended up becoming my bride, now married 26 years. Yeah, I was in a sports bar here in Jacksonville, Old Sports and More. Shout out to Old Sports and More, and the place just exploded. Yeah, it was a different era. You're right. A lot of people heard it on the radio. Era. Yeah.
And so that's exactly the point is like, most people didn't see the catch. Most people heard the catch and saw it through the eyes of Mick Hubert and experienced it in that way.
28-yard line. Werfel dropping back to throw, pumps and fires the ball over the middle. It's Doering! It's Doering! Got a touchdown! Doering's got a touchdown! Oh, man! Doering's got a touchdown! The Gators have taken the lead! Unbelievable! Chris Doering's got a touchdown!
And so I think it's really cool how he and I are bound together because of that play. I think it's really cool. You mentioned it, one of the top 5 plays in Florida football history, maybe whatever. But when I'm around Gator gatherings, inevitably people are going to come up to me and tell me exactly where they were and what they were doing the night that I caught that pass. And if you think about it, there's only a handful of times that we can remember exactly where we were and what we were doing at any point in our lives. And most of the time, it's a negative, it's when the space shuttle blew up or when a president was shot or, something like that. But for me, to have grown up a Gator fan and been so passionate about Florida football and to live and died with all the disappointing moments, to have been able to pull a game out like that, to save some young kid from the disappointment that I may have experienced in my childhood, and to, have people come up and remember where they were and what they were doing in a good way is very, very special for me.
All right, final thought. This year's team, I thought they were going to Kentucky it up for us again on Saturday, Chris. If there's any program in the country that was going to allow Florida to somehow escape with a win, it would have been the Kentucky Wildcats. They didn't. So obviously natives get more restless these days with social media than ever before in history. Give me your kind of status report on how damaging a loss that was and not just the remainder of this season, but how the table is set, do you feel, for the program?
Yeah, I think a lot of people don't realize how good Kentucky is. I mean, Coach Stoops has done a tremendous job of building that into a very viable landing spot for not only recruits coming out of high school, but for transfers. I mean, Wan'Dale Robinson is one of the most electric players in the country who just transferred back to the state of Kentucky from Nebraska. You look at Will Levis, coming from Penn State. They're continuing to attract really good talent, and they've built it the right way. I love the patience that Mitch Barnhart has shown there as the athletic director and staying with Coach Stoops. I love what he's been able to do and upgrade the talent at every single position and the competitiveness of that team. the defense is lights out. Obviously, the offense still needs to try to figure some things out. But I look at this Kentucky team as a team that has a chance to potentially win 10 or 11 games this year. And unfortunately, I think a lot of people remember Kentucky for what they used to be as opposed to where they are now. And I'm sure some Florida fans are disappointed by that loss, as they should be. I'm with you. I thought inevitably Kentucky was going to find a way to lose it. And they did with a face mask penalty, but their defense stood up and made plays down the stretch to preserve that victory. So the narrative's changing there. And, I think Florida's got things to deal with. You can't have 15 penalties. You can't give up 115 yards in penalties and still win a football game. You can't give up a block kick and win a football game. So Florida needs to find a way to regroup. There's a lot to play for, even though you may not see it right now. There's a lot of opportunity that still presents itself to have a tremendous season. I hope Florida can refocus and get back on track.
Chris Doering, our guest on Gator Glory, and I know Gator Nation loves hearing your story. Chris, I appreciate you taking some time with us. Continued success, both with your off-the-field endeavors, the work at SEC Network, and appreciate you taking some time with us today.
No, I appreciate it. It's been my pleasure. Thanks for having me.